Welcome to the Class Business Podcast. I'm Kristine, Monaghan, your host, and today we are joined by the data protection queen herself, Jo Brianti. Jo is a data protection expert who helps business owners take out the stress, the confusion out of compliance, and making data protection simple, practical, and easy to implement in everyday business. She is also the proud sponsor of Tutor Business of the Year category at the Class Business Awards. I can't wait for this conversation. So let's dive in. Jo, it's absolutely amazing to have you with us today on the podcast. For everyone who is listening online or watching us on YouTube, tell everyone who you are, what do you do, and where do you do it?
Hi, I'm Jo Brianti. I'm based in West London and I help small businesses locally to me in West London, nationally across the UK, and internationally with data protection. So I cover things like GDPR, the privacy and electronic communication regulations, that's cookies, email marketing, and the new regulation that sits alongside those called the Data Use and Access Act. And of course, what's hot on the block right now? AI. I'm doing an awful lot of work with supporting people with making sure that they're using AI safely and compliantly.
Brilliant. Okay, so first of all, how did we get into data protection? Because I can't imagine that, you left school and then thought that's where I'm going to go heading.
Well, no, but my background long before I had children, I was a project manager and I worked on really big databases, things like Oracle and SAP that you use in a corporate environment. So I worked with data and I worked with data protection regulation because we've had it in the UK since 1984. And it was, just one of those things that I did. Then I had twins and that just became far too difficult. The 90-minute commute each way, the long working days, twin babies that thought sleep was something that other people did, which meant that I didn't do a great deal of it. And it made life really difficult. So I started working for myself. And then in 2017, I read something on a blog about this new data protection regulation. And we all remember in 2018 that huge kind of woof, oh no, you're going to get fined 20 million euros. I just calmly and collectedly was just telling people, you don't earn 20 million euros. You're earning 150,000. How are they ever going to fine you that? And because it was all blown out of proportion. And also, I was sort of saying to people, you don't need to worry about a lot of what's being talked about because it's not relevant in your business. And data protection is very much about your business, your way. And there's a lot of words like adequate and proportionate. Now, what's adequate for my business, solo operator based in a home office in West London, and Coca-Cola are two very different things. So it's about, let's just think a little bit about data protection. Who is it that's needing this? What are they doing? And what's their business doing? Because not every business runs the same way. Not every business manages data or uses data or collects the same data. So that's where I come from in data protection. And over the years since 2017, I became a qualified data protection officer. I've done more and more in-depth training, and I do all the reading that small business owners don't have the time for. And let's be quite frank, it's dull, it's dry, and not everybody wants to read the kind of books that I do on, data protection and blogs and that sort of thing. So that's why you come to me. That's why people say, what do I do about? Okay, we can fix that.
Yeah, because basically it's a funny one, isn't it? Like you said, data protection, because like you said, it is, people don't want to do that type of work. That's not what they came into the business for, but obviously they have to have those some, protection in place. When we're talking about handling data, particularly for our audience, like my audience, what would you say the main things are? That they collect email addresses, they'll collect numbers, they've got booking systems, they may have their own website. Some of them are part of franchises, so they don't have control over the website. So what are the things that my people need to be aware of?
So the first thing any business owner, and it doesn't matter whether they're in their children's activity world, whether they are a childminder, or whether they are a data protection consultant or a marketing consultant, you have to know what data you're collecting. Because if you don't know what data you're gathering in your business, everything else, it doesn't matter what else I say to you. Do you know what I mean? And then the next fundamental thing that you need is you need to think about how you protect the data. Small Business Britain at the moment are running a great 4-week cybersecurity course. Now, this is not designed for, technical experts. It's designed for small business owners like children's activity providers, like the solo consultant. Cybersecurity is a huge risk for any business. And the smaller the business, potentially the more risk you are in, simply because you don't have the money to spend on massive tech teams who will do all this stuff for you. Your head of marketing, head of finance, head of comms, head of recruitment, the team manager, and now you've got to worry about this. So that will cover some fundamental things for you. Strong passwords, passcodes, where is your data being accessed? Let me give you an example. Every so often I work from my gym. It's great, lovely. I look out over the tennis courts, the swimming pool, and it's a different vibe. Now, I was sat there one day typing away, and I watched this man get up. He didn't even close his laptop. He just walked away. And I thought, well, paying a visit, going to get coffee. He went and had a class. He returned 45 minutes later. His laptop was open and I could read what was on the screen. So I knew what was in his email inbox from the desk that I was sat at. Now, that is an example of data loss in your business. Now, as it happens, I didn't see any confidential data, but I could have seen not just the data that we protect under GDPR, like names, addresses, emails, but I could have seen some confidential business information. So if you think about being a franchisee or a franchisor, and that is one of your team members, or, you're a smaller business and it's one of your team members who's left that, I could be a competitor and I could see your information about your business. So there's a fundamental thing that you can think about straight away is, how do I protect the data? What are the rules I give my team members and my franchisees about how they protect data? Are they allowed to work in a cafe? If they go to work in a cafe, how do they know whether the Wi-Fi is secure? Right? Because there's lots and lots of kind of ways that we work now. I go to the gym, people go to the cafe, on a train, who's looking over your shoulder and looking at what's on your, and if you're in your CRM database and I look over your shoulder, I might be able to get names, addresses, and if it's a form that's got children's data, there might be the name of the child, there might be their home address, school address, all of these things. It's introducing something called risk. So one of the things that I tell people to do if they're working in a cafe or outside of the secure home environment or wherever office is I tell them to buy this screen. and you put it over your laptop screen and it blurs it. So I can see very clearly my laptop screen, but if I'm this far away looking, or somebody's looking over my shoulder, they can't read it because they've got to be at the right angle. So it's small things like that that are really, really fundamental things for small businesses.
Okay, and that course that you were talking about, when's that happening?
The first module starts tomorrow, but you can sign up for it today or tomorrow, and you can just literally get involved, and they send out recordings, so if you're running a class this morning and you can't be there, then off you go, you can get the recordings. And they do run these courses on a fairly regular basis. So if you miss this 4-week course now, I guarantee that they will run it again. It's not one and done. And it's totally free. 4 weeks, and it will cover some very, very basic security things.
Perfect. And so the first thing is, obviously, they think about what they're collecting.
Yes.
The second thing is how they protect that data. Yes. And then is there a third thing?
Yeah. So once you know and understand what data, you can then, whether it's with some help from me or, researching it for yourself, understand what you have to do and what your obligations are. So, for example, are you collecting sensitive personal data versus ordinary personal data? So what we mean by that is, if you're only collecting names, addresses, telephone numbers, that's ordinary personal data. Yes, we have to take care of it. Then there is uber sensitive personal data, like health, sexual orientation, union membership, religion, ethnicity, that kind of stuff. Now, there's this little piece in the middle that sort of falls sort of semi in between ordinary data and sensitive personal data. And that's where a lot of your clients are going to sit, because they'll be going to be collecting children's data. They're going to be collecting finance data because they're going to be invoicing people, or they're going to be paying people. So they will have bank details and that kind of thing. Now, those sorts of data, they're not sensitive from a GDPR perspective, but neither are they data that is going to be publicly available, because as parents, we all look after our children, we protect them, so we protect their data. We protect our bank details, or I would hope we do. So we just need to think about how we give them a little bit extra protection. Now, that could be restricting who has access to that data, restricting, in the case of, let's say, a child, if a child is coming to one of your play sessions or your activity sessions, you might collect name, address, telephone number, medical conditions, for allergies, that sort of thing. You might collect the names of who's allowed to collect them at the end of the session. You might collect the name of their school. And some of those pieces of data on their own are maybe inconsequential, but when you put them together, they could, give a full picture of that child, which, let's be frank, there are people out there in this world who target children for all sorts of reasons. And that could be enough if it got out into the world for one of these individuals to target that child. So you need to think about, okay, the person who's running tomorrow's session, they need to know the name of the child. They need to know the age of the child, but they don't need to know the date of birth. They don't need to know what school they attend, unless, of course, you're delivering the session on school premises. But, think about what data you're giving to your team members. Do they need that whole record? They might need to know certain elements like the allergy. if there's food involved. But if there's not food involved, you might not need to know that unless they're carrying an EpiPen or, something like that. So think carefully about what data you're sharing.
And I suppose that's when a good booking system partner, like, if you use Book That In or Classes for Kids, Book When, there's like so many different opportunities out there. I suppose that's when those systems really kick into play. Because I think, obviously, Jo, probably from the olden days, we would have been like pen and paper. Like people would have just had registers on the table and they're ticking people off. And obviously it has moved on completely. And then, like you said, that can be, someone could swipe it if they want to. But whereas now, if they use like proper systems, then that is a mechanism of protecting the data.
Yeah. And what I would say is, if you are using these online systems, yes, they're great, but they can be configured most of the time in different ways. So different businesses will have different requirements. And if you can't see how you can configure, the export to show only name and, contact telephone number or something, and you minimize how much data you're giving, then go back to that company and say, I want to make sure that the only data my team leader has is X, Y, and Z, but I can't see how I do that on a report. And go back to them, because at the end of the day, it's not Book When or it's not Book Me In or any of these systems that are liable if something goes wrong. The business owner, as the data controller, is the person who is in charge of making sure that they know what data is collected, they know how it's being protected, and they are minimizing risks.
Well, that brings me nicely on as well, Jo, to the next, actually another question. Obviously, you mentioned being the data controller.
Yeah.
And I know there's always been a question around who is the data controller in a franchisor situation, because you've got franchisor and franchisee. But then also, like, I know I'm registered with the ICO as well. And I think sometimes people get confused about that. If they're an independent business owner, do they need to be registered with the ICO? So explain that, just so it might be relevant.
Let me explain the roles. So there is somebody called the data controller and there is somebody called the data processor, right? Now, the data controller is the person who makes all the rules in the data from a data perspective. They decide what data is collected, how it is collected, who they share it with, how long they keep it, what they do with it, and anything to do with data. They collect and decide about data. They must register with the ICO. Okay? Now, let's put this into some context. The processor does what they're told. They don't make any decisions about the data that is collected. They are given a rule book and they follow that rule book when it comes to the data. Okay? So I'll run through now what that could look like in the real world. So I'm a franchisor and I have a central booking system. I have a central control base, all the data, all the class bookings, everything comes through me and my organization. Okay. I am the data controller. The franchisee in that situation is a processor because they don't get to choose what data is collected, how it's used. They just get whether it's an Excel spreadsheet download or whether they just get read access, whatever. Mm-hmm. They are processing, they're not making the choices. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? This is a franchisor, this is the franchisee, and the franchisee in that relationship is the processor, okay? But let's just say that this franchisee is also running independent birthday parties and that kind of thing. They then become a data controller for the data that they're collecting independently. So they may still have to register with the ICO for that independent work that is outside of the franchise.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, that's one franchise model. But as we know, there is also the franchise model where you have the franchisor who doesn't make any decisions about data. So they have a franchisee, and the franchisee is free to choose whatever software they want. They do all their own marketing, and they can also be a data controller in that position. So you've got two data controllers, right? So that the franchisor is the data controller because they recruit franchisees. So they collect data, they decide what they do with that, they control. The franchisee, who is then doing the recruitment of the children, setting up sessions in schools, whatever, they are making decisions about data, so they are data controller. In that situation, both parties must register with the ICO as data controllers. Okay? Now, the other thing to think about here is where the responsibility for GDPR lies in terms of training, policies, processes, all of those things. Now, where data controller is the franchisor and data controller is the franchisee, both of them have independent responsibilities for the data that they collect in their businesses. Okay? Where you've got the franchisor who is the data controller and the franchisee is just given the data and they don't control any of that, the franchisor is responsible for making sure that the processor knows and understands data protection, that they are set up with a set of processes, the relevant forms, the relevant everything related to data must come from the franchisor. And ultimately, if you are a franchisor as a data controller and you have, let's say, 10 franchisees who are processing, if one of them gets it wrong, the impact on your brand at the top could be quite significant because it's no longer just Jo Brianti in the West London branch. It's Jo Brianti, who is part of the franchise, who has not made any decisions because the data controller, the franchisor, has not provided the relevant advice, guidance, and support. So as well as your pack around how to use branding and, you know, all of the business focused stuff, you need to think about where the responsibility lies. And even in the sort of the franchise where both parties are data controllers because there's independence, I would still suggest that the controller needs to consider what is happening with GDPR and data protection with the franchisee, because if you've spent years building a well-respected brand and one of your franchisees gets into real trouble with data protection, it could be investigated, all of those things, that could really damage the whole franchise because it, you know, they're interrelated. And it's important to remember that if things do go wrong, first of all, the ICO will help. They will investigate. But if you're found to be negligent, if you're found to be not, you know, doing even the basics, you're potentially looking at more significant problems than if this is just a genuine mistake. Because we're human beings, we all make mistakes. But there is a risk around that with getting it wrong because it's brand damaging. Yeah.
And then for independent business owners, they need to have everything.
Independent business owners are data controllers in their own right, and they need to be registered with the ICO. They need to make sure that they're doing, what they should be doing to protect the data that they're using. And for those franchisees that are a processor, because they don't control what data they collect as part of their franchise, but they're doing independent work as well, they are both a data controller and a processor. So they're a processor when they're working for the franchise, but they're also a controller when they're doing their independent activities as parties or whatever.
Wow. So hopefully that will clear up for some people, because I know sometimes they do get confused and they're like, I'm not sure if they're supposed to be registered or not supposed to be registered. I think the website's quite helpful though, isn't it? The ICO one, because you actually go through and it will tell you if you are or not, isn't it?
Now, one of the things that I would say is that I've used the quiz on the ICO website a few times with people. And if you answer the question or interpret the question in a different way than it's written, which is very easy to do, it might tell you that you shouldn't be registered, right? And I've worked with small clients in the past who said, I don't need to be registered with the ICO. And I've said, but you must, because you're collecting this data, this data, this data. And most importantly, you are collecting health data. If you are collecting any sensitive data, and children's activity providers will, because they're going to be asking about allergies, particularly if there's food involved in, like it's a nursery or something, you must.
So I think that's the sense check, isn't it? If you're collecting sensitive data, then yes, you should be registered is the answer to that one.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's about 50 quid a year.
Yeah, it's not much, no.
So realistically, if your business is going to think, oh, I can't afford 50 quid a year just in case, then really have you got a business? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
because
of course.
It's not a massive amount of money. And if you pay it on direct debit, you get a bit of a discount. And they send you a notification month or 6 weeks before the payment is due, so you can make sure it's there in the bank and all the rest of it. But 50 quid, it's a bit like, for me, it's a bit like paying insurance.
Yes, of course.
I pay 100 and something quid a month in insurance because of the type of work I do. I may never claim on it, but if I don't have it, you can bet your bottom dollar that somebody's going to knock on the door and there's a problem. Do you know what I mean?
So obviously we covered those parts, and then obviously we've got the new, AI is here. It's fast approaching. Don't even think we've probably even touched the sides of it in the UK right now. So obviously people are using, and I do every day, like Claude or ChatGPT. Some people are using Gemini. Yeah. What do our people need to know about AI and data protection?
Short answer, don't put personal data of any description into AI at the moment, because it's evolving so fast, and you really need to look at the terms and conditions. And I know that sounds dull and boring and uninteresting, but you really need to look at the terms and conditions, because all of the tools do things slightly differently, right? Now, I went to an event and I listened to an AI specialist, and I mean a really niche AI developer. And one of the things that I didn't realize until I listened to him was, if you go into, I'm a big Claude user. Claude is my best friend, alongside Perplexity, which I use for a lot of detailed research. And, in Claude, you can go into your settings and you turn it off. No, it's not. The data is not being shared with the LLM and all of those things. And then if you have a chat with Claude and you press the up or downward thumb, As soon as you do that, it overrides your settings and it takes all that data in that conversation and it will use it to train its LLM.
Ah, okay. Well, I don't ever press those buttons, but
no, I don't. But I didn't realise that, and that was something that I was told. So we're all learning as we go along. So basically, what I say to people is that unless you are, using enterprise grade where you can really nail down the security, you've got to be exceptionally careful about putting stuff into them. And what you've got to think about here is when we talk about data, there is GDPR and data protection relevant data, the names, the addresses, the emails. But there is also sensitive business data. Okay. Now, sensitive business data could be things like how much you charge for classes, how many classes you deliver. It could be your marketing strategy, which, if you're a very successful franchise with hundreds of franchisees, that new franchise on the block might be very interested to know what your business strategy is. Now, those kinds of pieces of information, you might want to be a little bit careful about whether they are going to go into your Claude, your Chat, your Gemini, whatever your tool of use is, and whether it's going to be used by the LLM, which is the fundamental building block, the mass database that learns, scoops up all this data, right? Because when you put in your question, I want to know about GDPR in the UK, the LLM can't give you an answer unless it's got this huge bank of data. So if you allow your data to go in there, and this sensitive, you are training the LLM. Now, what that means is that if you put that data in, and then I go and do a search, I want to develop a business strategy for a new franchise in the children's activity arena, and we're going to do a sports class. I may get data from your franchise in my results, because that is what happens with the LLM. It is going to give me an answer, and it is going to share data with whatever it's got in its database, right? And that's fundamentally how AI works. It doesn't just go away and create answers. It looks at the data in its big database, its big pool, and it brings back the most relevant answers. And the most relevant answers could be your marketing strategy, because last week you loaded that up there. Yeah? So when you think about using AI, it's about thinking about how am I using it securely? And it's across the business, not just about those core pieces of data that we have to protect under data protection. We have to think about how are we protecting our business as a whole. Yeah. So things like in my world, I do contract reviews, I do sort of policy reviews. So what I do before I put anything into Claude, which is my tool of choice, or Perplexity, is I might strip out any elements of that document that show me that this is Chrissy's document, or that it belongs to franchise A or franchise B. Okay. And when I do my prompt, I put the document in and I tell Claude, I have stripped out all data that identifies the client or is specifically client oriented. Please, can you analyze this based on these factors, whatever I'm trying to do? Okay. It takes me a little bit longer than the 3 or 4 seconds that AI can do this stuff. But that way I'm protecting you as my client. So when you're using AI, these are the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about. It's not just about, I shouldn't put children's data in there, or I shouldn't put, I shouldn't be putting, recently, as an example, somebody shared a screenshot of a post that had been put out telling you that you could use Claude or ChatGPT or whichever your tool of choice was as a financial advisor. And the advice was that if you loaded up your bank statements and various other things, they would analyze it, they would give you advice on savings and all this kind of. Now, if you've put your bank statement into Claude or ChatGPT, doesn't matter which tool, they all work fundamentally the same way. That bank statement with your name, home address, sort code, account code potentially, if you haven't hidden all of those, they're all sat in an LLM somewhere. Plus, when you look at the transactions, if you think about your statement, it might say, oh, I've paid Chrissy £100 today. I paid Cafe X, and it might put part of their bank information, in the descriptor piece. So there could be quite a lot of information in there. Now, interestingly, I didn't share bank details, but I tried with Claude to get some information on, should I have a pension? Should I have just to ask these questions. And the first thing Claude said to me is, I am not a financial advisor, so I can't give you tailored advice, but I can tell you that a pension is X, and this is that, and ISA is that, and it gave me details. You might like to explore these with a financial advisor.
Yeah. So
interesting.
Yeah, it is. I do find Claude different interface, obviously, there to ChatGPT. So basically, people just need to think about what they are putting in there and remove any sensitive information if they're looking to obviously protect their business. So, Jo, obviously, you are like the queen of data, and obviously, you know all of this stuff. And like, I know you're the expert, and if people want to connect with you, then you're definitely the person to come and speak to. You're a sponsor for us at the Class Business Awards. So just tell everyone why you wanted to be part of the awards.
So awards are important for businesses. Now, I'm saying that on the basis that I've never applied for an award because I've just never got round to it. But they are hugely important for your marketing. And I think that, these awards will do a lot for businesses to help them, market and show that they're quality. And I also think, from having spoken to a number of people who've gone through awards processes, it's a great way for you to review your business, because you've suddenly got to talk about, where are my testimonials? Am I getting testimonials? How have I grown? I started on my own 6 weeks ago, and now I've got 10 people working for me. That's a bit extreme, but you can see what I mean. And I think it's important to support that growth of small businesses. And it's exciting to be part of a type of organisation, a type of business that focuses on delivering our next generation. That the activity providers are, very often underestimated in terms of what they deliver for children. It's not just an hour after school of playtime. They're learning real skills, whether that's social, whether that's maths, whether that's another topic,
Oh, no, for sure. And I've just been interviewing the amazing Rachel Peebles, who's one of our judges this year. And she was just saying that, because she's in the middle, like the judges are in the middle of it now. And she said the impact that everybody's having is just incredible. And she said, and what she found really interesting is that obviously when they're having an impact in their area, but they don't know, obviously, the impact that everyone else is having. And she's like, if you just add up the cumulative impact everyone's having, it's just blown her mind, really. And I think you're right. We, as parents, we send our children to school, and then we look for other opportunities to give them experiences, be it if they want to learn piano or tech and everything else. Well, who do we turn to? We turn to that provision. We turn to sports clubs, amateur clubs that are out there doing it every day, reliant, volunteers, and the providers and class business owners. And I think a lot of people forget that. And I've had conversations with people from the Small Business Federation, and they were like, they just didn't even appreciate that there was a sector doing that, because they just see it just normally there. They just didn't even think it of, oh my God, there's actually people that is a whole sector that they didn't even know existed, really. But no, they're out there every day, week in, week out, delivering activities and having that massive benefit. And so we're delighted to have you as a sponsor with us. It's so excited to have you on board. And if people want to connect with you to talk about all things data, maybe they need to review the GDPR privacy statements, how they're actually working in their business right now, where can they connect with you?
LinkedIn. I've got a website, jobrianti.co.uk. And there's a form you can send an inquiry through there. But LinkedIn is where I tend to hang out. I've also got an Instagram account, but it tends to be a bit more social, about me, my holidays, the food I've cooked, my kids, So work is LinkedIn and fun is Insta.
Perfect. And everyone will be meeting you on the 10th of October at the event. So they can definitely come and speak to you there and then.
Absolutely, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jo, for so much information today. Really useful information, because I know it's things that people get themselves in a bit of a pickle about because they're not sure what they should be doing. And so I think they will find that really, really beneficial. So thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome. Nice to chat to you.